Today, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite parts of the miniature making hobby, how to conceptualize and make units. So the research behind it and how I consider the themes behind units. I want to explain my design process for units. You might think that painting a unit is just about grabbing it from the store and running from the police and then slapping on colors willy-nilly from reference pictures on the internet, waiting for the heat to die down. While that is always a common element, I think a considered and planned approach can yield a more army cohesive and visually interesting unit, as well as assist in evading capture from the authorities. When I was researching my Celtic army, I stumbled across this great concept art for Total War Arena that goes into the design choices for the armies there. You can see that even as the game is essentially historical, the concept art and artistic direction can still emphasize elements to keep each army distinct and give them their own identity. And this was inspirational for my own design process for my armies. Ever since I saw those images initially, I've kept them in mind for how I design armies, from a conceptual stage all the way to the execution. Now, why is it important to do unit design? Well, at the most basic level, designing anything is to put thought into how and why elements should be created. If you have no concept for your project, you're going to end up with many unpondered, unforeseen elements, which can still lead to an effective end result, but risks being less effective because elements that could improve the miniatures could have been left out or implemented improperly. So when is unit design unnecessary? One way that many units can be created is just to build the unit as is and copy the colors from the box art. Some regiments from history have well-known colors and have uniform arms and armor, and you could just easily use those for references. In those cases, you can skip this whole unit design process and come out with great units because either, like in many Games Workshop armies, the color choices and thematic elements have already been curated for you, or for historical armies, you have a higher priority for historical accuracy over thematic consistency. And history is what makes units good for you. But you still may want to consider your design elements to further improve your unit, or your unit may be ununiform or have a custom color scheme which you're trying to execute, in which case I think the steps for unit design could be very helpful. This video will cover my whole process of designing a unit. To show the practical execution of my points, I've chosen the examples of two units I've completed recently, the mounted monk cavalry unit and the Ronin unit for my Iki army. Army themes. My approach for units start at the army level. The themes and concepts of the army are the foundations for how I proceed in making anything. Why does this matter? If all your units are not designed to fit into the same army with the same visual identifiers, then the units won't look cohesive. And looking at the army as a whole, the units will not fit together as they are mismatched with different colors, sculpts, poses, and bases. People generally like patterns and a sense of order, so the chaos of mismatching units can be visually jarring. The themes of the army should be determined and become the guiding principles onwards for the units. Within army themes, I list the core colors of the army, including a spot color usually, as well as a general tone, impression, and appearance I want the army to go towards. I try to think of elements that make this particular army distinct from others, and emphasize these elements most, so that if they were to contest other armies on the tabletop, each side would have distinct elements to differentiate them. The army theme stage is essentially my research stage, when I'm looking into the history of the army, the media portraying this faction, and the popular archetypes associated with these units. With my Iki army, the themes are multicolors with cream tints for most of the army, increasing pattern complexity and color diversity, with cream tints corresponding with wealth, cream, dark blue, orange, yellow, and black robes for monks, cream accessories for the whole army, no bright red, spot color, cream, more earthly and natural, but light enough to tint every color, provides a faded look that indicates the battered, worn-out poverty of the commoners. Makeshift poverty of the masses. Lack of patterns and uniformity. Bared flesh. Practical, varied, and cheap weapons and armor for lower-end units. Religious fanaticism. Mikoshi shrines. Monk cowls and head coverings. Slogan banners. Use of Shimenawa rope. Shide. The white zigzag papers. Manji. And Tomo. Banners are carried by lower ranking units, not by elite units, which are either already symbols of religious piety or are uninterested. Confederation of the Unseen. Explore the esoteric elements of Sengoku warfare that wouldn't fit in a daimyo's army, with Ronin, pirates, Mikoshi shrines, monks and priests, all united loosely by common cause. Cherry blossoms and black earth. Bases will be a gradient of 2 cherry blossom colors and black earth. No elevated bases, no units are socially above others, and this also links to my daimyo army. This video is not going to explore these themes in detail, as this would dramatically increase the runtime. But these are the themes for my example units in this video. I'll be referring to these for explanations of my design choices. With the army themes done, it's worth considering that your units may have sub-themes that derive from the original themes. You may want to explore variants of your original themes to add interest to your army, or just want a thematic break that you think will better serve the presentation of the whole. Unit themes can be stereotypes of popular conceptions of the unit that you want to fulfill, but are not originally listed in your themes. For my monk unit, I wanted to emphasize that they are monks, and fulfill the pop culture conception of Sohei. The Sohei in pop culture are head cowl wearing, robe wearing monks, armed with naginatas. The themes covered by the monks are already covered by my army themes, so I didn't have anything to add, but the image of the monk as a singular idea for the unit was kept in mind. Researching Japanese religion, I saw that Shimenawa rope and shide, the white zigzag papers, were common symbols at temples that seemed easy to recreate on the tabletop. There is also the controversial manji, or swastika, and the tomo symbol. I reasoned that, as the spiritual leaders of the army, the monks would be bedecked with the most overt religious iconography. While researching, I discovered that the pop culture concept of the Sohei is essentially historically inaccurate. Sohei is an Edo Meiji period term for monks, applied retroactively. Historical monks did not wield naginata exclusively, and it was unlikely that monks would have worn the head cowls and robes into battle, but would have essentially been indistinguishable from samurai. I had to choose to adhere to historical accuracy or to go with pop culture images, and I chose the pop culture image because I already have a samurai force, so I want to be able to visually distinguish between my forces on the tabletop, and I think the image of the robed monk is too strong to ignore. The Ronin unit had countless references to draw upon, with the image of the loner, esoteric Ronin, being established by popular movies and Japanese animation. I decided that the sub-themes of the Ronin were of mercenaries, to be individuals and to be very skilled warriors. Executing that, I could see that the unit would break from the army's established use of the cream spot color to visually show how their affiliations are separate. I would try to make each figure as unique as possible to emphasize that this would be a unit of individuals, and perhaps have them in various martial poses, handling their weapons, to demonstrate their skill. These themes don't apply to the rest of the army, because they are specific qualities and stereotypes of the Ronin. Another thematic break from the main army is that the Ronin are fighting for coin or glory, not for religion, whereas my depiction of the Iko-Iki is of religious fanaticism. This thematic break adds an alternative narrative for this specific unit, which expands the depth of the army's overall story. Considering that historical Ronin were essentially just samurai, the historical appearance of this unit would be like samurai. However, I wanted to lean more into the pop culture image of Ronin, with straw hats and some oni masks, which could have been plausible, but not the most historically likely. Model choice and modifications. Once I know the foundational themes for the army, in building a unit, I will need to select the individual models to fill in a unit. Remember in school where you had to get picked for team sports? It's a little bit like that. Ideally, I want these sculpts to embody the themes. If the army is conceptualized as an aggressive raiding force, I would like sculpts which would be charging and swinging weapons. They would have open body postures to emphasize their aggressive and confident nature. A defensive force would have more static poses, with more opportunity for kneeling figures, bracing for a charge. If the force is disciplined and well organized, I would want models with their equipment and weapons to be more uniform, to emphasize a centralized distribution system for arms and armor. Conversely, if the force is less organized, the figures should be less uniform, with a wider range of equipment and weapons to imply that everyone has to source their arms and armor from a variety of sources. Maybe a force has a particular element that it's trying to emphasize, such as no sleeves, in which case I would attempt to source more models without sleeves. But maybe the odd model has sleeves if the force is less organized and more chaotic. Thematic breaks can be a theme in themselves. I then consider the ethnicity of the people in the unit, so I could make you very uncomfortable as you wondered where this sentence was going to go. It's like when someone mentions Hitler, and every table within the vicinity actually pauses while they wait to hear the whole sentence, so they'll know if they have to leave immediately. What'd you say? About Hitler? After selecting models, I may need to modify them to make them adhere to the themes better, or just to improve their aesthetics. This is like plastic surgery, but for models. I use green stuff and plastic card to sculpt cloth or hair or mend gaps in joints. For the unit of mounted monks, the models looked suitably like warrior monks, but I wanted more variety in weapons to emphasize the makeshift nature of the army, so I replaced one of the cavalrymen's naginata with a spear. To satisfy the theme of religious fanaticism, I felt it would be appropriate to cover the unit in religious symbols, as I had already established in the theme section. So I used plastic card to make shide papers, I twisted twin green stuff ropes to make Shimenawa rope, and decided to cut out a plastic card swastika for the leader's horse. Now for model selection, what would suit the theme of monks and religious fanaticism? Well, I could see aggressive poses working to emphasize the fanatical side, but I also wanted to emphasize the mysterious side of religion with head cowls and wrappings. My reasoning is that if you hide facial features, you create an element of mystery, and I think that plays well into the unknowable nature of existence and religion. So I decided to choose, with only one exception, sculpts that hid as much of the face as possible, which meant models that had head cowls that hid the mouth. For the unit of Ronin, I was trying to make individual skilled mercenaries. My model selection logic was to get as many varied miniatures as possible from as many companies as possible. I tried to find many sculpts with straw hats, and I wanted some Oni masks to fulfill the theme of head cowls in a roundabout way. This unit will obscure their faces too, and add to the theme of mystery, just in a different way. I wanted a variety of weapons to show the unorganized nature of the army, but also emphasize their individuality. So I managed to get a Nagamaki armed warrior, a dual-wielding katana warrior, an axe-armed warrior, and Tetsubo armed warrior into the mix. I managed to choose warriors with a variety of esoteric gear, with some being armored, one wearing partial armor, and I sculpted a straw raincoat for a model. When I was researching Ronin, I found a common archetype for Ronin was having messy hair, as employed samurai would often have a chonmage hairstyle. One model's hair was too neat, so I made the top knot wilder with green stuff. Painting. The painting phase is the main stage and the most work for your miniatures. A lot of the way a miniature looks comes down to the paint job. I mean, other than obviously trying to paint my miniatures well, I'm considering the themes of the army in my color choice. The spot color and main colors of the unit are primary considerations as they link to the broader army, and with each unit drawing from these color choices, the whole force will look cohesive and unified. If the army is more aggressive, I'd consider more emotional colors, like red and yellow. If the army is more optimistic or hopeful, I'd consider brighter colors. Yes, armies can be happy too. The Crusaders were on a mission from God to reclaim the Holy Land. That is happy in comparison to the Chosun Koreans getting massacred in their homeland. Inversely, if the mood of the army is of a fall or an ending, like the late Roman army for example, you could consider darkening all your colors to match this grimmer mood. Consider that when you're painting miniatures, your colors don't have to actually try to depict reality as you see it, but rather how you feel it, trying to evoke a mood rather than trying to capture a unit in photorealistic terms. But that's just one alternative way of thinking about color. Consider the use of freehand to convey cultural concepts, and the more elaborate the patterning, the more the pattern could signify an elite unit. You could even differentiate different units using different patterns, which are associated with certain units, for example. Historical accuracy is an important consideration for color choice, but you may have a range of possible colors for units depending on your time period, and dyes could vary in color as well, leading to a range of hues in a unit. There's also popular conceptions of certain historical periods that may influence your color scheme. For example, movies depicting the medieval ages use many dark colors, and there's a lot of use of brown, even though this is completely historically inaccurate. But if you wanted to use color thematically, it could be a consideration to color everything with a brown tint. And it'd be easier to paint too, because you just use a brown wash over everything. For my unit of monk cavalry, I knew that the colors of Japanese monk robes could be saffron, black, blue, cream, or yellow. I wanted to have each monk in different colors to showcase the possible colors historically. While cream tints are common for most of the army, I decided not to mix bleached bone into the clothing colors of the monks because the head cowls would already evidence the army's cream spot color, but I also wanted to distance them from the more common troops. With the cream or bone tint providing a more earthly, faded look, avoiding it would make this unit's colors seem more saturated, and therefore richer and newer, which would be fitting for the socially more prestigious monks. I knew that with the head cowls, in conjunction with various other accessories like belts and pants, there would be a strong use of the cream color on each model, so they would adhere to the overall bone color scheme across the army. To work out the coats of their horses, I researched the horse coats available in the Sengoku Jidai period in Japan and followed that direction. I decided that this unit was elite, essentially the unit for my general, so I gave it gold accents where possible, and you can see the use of gold on the edge of robes. I decided to paint all of their armor black, as the dark tone would contrast with the brighter colors of their head cowls and most of their robes. For my unit of Ronin, I wanted the paint job to emphasize the individuality, while still tying the whole unit to the broader army. I also wanted to show, through painting, the elite nature of this unit. To me, that would mean utilizing the army's spot color of cream where possible, but also varying the amount of colors in the unit without cream tints to show how each figure is their own master, and not as tied to the overall loyalties of the army, implied by a lack of adherence to the army's color scheme. Having some accessories in the cream color would still visually tie this unit to the broader army, but not having the cream colored tint in the general robes would be a visual break to single out this unit. To make each figure individual, I varied the color scheme on each figure so they all had different colored pants and shirts. To emphasize their higher status, I gave many of the miniatures different freehand patterns on their clothing, which I found from Ghost of Tsushima concept art, and this was a very time-consuming process. I looked into Yakuza tattoos and tried to replicate them on some of the models to reinforce the idea of the Ronin as outlaws and criminals. Basing. When making bases, they can tell a story about units and the army by extension, so they're still a part of the models to consider. You can try to make your bases historically accurate by making the bases a native terrain type for the unit that they're carrying. The bases could reference a specific site or battle. You could include props on your bases to influence the themes of the army. If your army is aggressive, perhaps the bodies of your foes or a flame-scorched battlefield would be suitable base decorations. If your army is defensive, you could emphasize its nature by putting a wall or pavis shields at the front rank for the troops to shelter behind. Consider the elevation of your bases. You can give specific units hills or raised platforms to stand upon, which would emphasize their importance and draw the audience's eye relative to the other units. Natural elements like grass and sand will be passed over for attention because they're so common, but within the realms of reality and not fantasy or science fiction, you could consider open flames, tiled floors, shallow water, flowers, wooden boards, or beaches. Where the units are situated can imply different things for the unit because it changes the context. Consider if you want all your unit bases to be matching to create army-wide coherence, or if you're happy with a chaotic mix. I generally try to keep all the unit bases to the same style and theme to achieve army unity, but that's just my personal preference. For both my Monk and Ronin unit, they use the same base style as the rest of the army. Fallen cherry blossoms, rest atop black earth. I wanted a base style that was uniquely Japanese, which was different from my other Sengoku period Japanese army. Cherry blossoms have modern Japanese connotations, even though they can be found across Asia, so I was interested in depicting them, and their rare representation in tabletop wargaming made them more attractive. I decided to use them because of their Japanese associations. They can symbolize fleeting vitality and vibrancy in Japanese culture, and that mirrors the Iko-Iki's religious fanaticism well. The Black Earth links the army visually to the Black Earth bases used in my Daimyo army. So that's my whole process in designing units. I hope that you found that useful in conceptualizing and making your own units. So those are the considerations that I make when thinking about the anatomy of a unit. There's a lot of conceptual work for when I actually make units in my armies, so I hope that that'll be important for you. Maybe you learn something about unit creation, maybe it'll give you some new ideas and new directions to take when making your own units. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I want to thank my Patreon supporter, the Command Bunker, for sponsoring this video.